Wells of Wells of Silence. By TheBeckster. Chapter 1. 15 Weeks. This meeting could not go any slower. Anakin shifted in her seat, trying to find a position that would help elevate some of her discomfort. Nothing helped. It felt like her whole body was trying to kill her, slowly and painfully. She had barely heard a word in the last hour. She didn't even know who was reporting right now. This migraine was 3 days strong and didn't show any signs of leaving anytime soon. Light sensitivity paired with vertigo and nausea was not a fun combination. She hadn't slept. She had barely eaten. She couldn't even look at the hollow table. At least the rest of the lights in the room were dimmed. Nothing she tried seemed to help at all. If she wasn't so keen on avoiding the healers, she would have gone to them days ago rather than drawing out this suffering. Her stomach rolled painfully, rising bile into the back of her throat. She swallowed it down and resolved to pay the healers a visit if she made it through this morning. With something like a migraine, they'd just give her medicine and send her on her way. They wouldn't bother with an exam. She would just have to make sure she didn't vomit while in medbay, and she could get off free. How much longer? Anakin stole a glance at the hollow table dominating the center of the room. Depa Bilaba's hologram hovered off to one side, accompanied by the small form of her apprentice. The rest of the display was dedicated to a large map illustrating Republic and Separatist troop movements. Depa was reporting on a long siege underway on some outer rim planet. She truthfully had no idea where Balaba was stationed. She had missed that part of the report, and she quite honestly didn't care at the moment. Anakin looked away quickly, hoping she hadn't stared for too long at the bright flickering holograms. She was rewarded with a lance of pain traveling from the back of her skull to her eyes. She clenched her jaw tighter and looked down at her knees. Her stomach clenched painfully. It felt like someone was gripping her intestines and was twisting their claws around in them. A feverish chill racked her body as she swallowed the bile that rose in her throat again. She must have grimaced because Obi-Wan cast her a sideways glance which almost immediately turned into a concerned frown. He leaned over, placing a gentle and on her crossed arms. "Are you all right?" he whispered. "You look pale." Anakin responded with a terse nod and tight-lipped "mm-hmm." She didn't trust her body to cooperate if she opened her mouth. Obi-Wan continued watching her, still concerned. "You're still sick, Anakin. Go to the healers after this meeting," he muttered sternly. "You should have gone weeks ago, like I told you." Anakin glared at her old master. Luckily, she was spared from having to muster a response when the tone of the meeting changed. Depa had finished her report. Her hologram had flickered away, as had the battlefield maps. Anakin sincerely hoped that was the last report. She wasn't entirely sure she could last much longer. Master Yoda stepped up to the table. Anakin half listened, focusing more on not vomiting all over her boots, as he called for any more news. When none came, he ended the meeting. Anakin shot to her feet before the Jedi Master could finish saying, "May the Force be with you." She was halfway to the door before the lights started to rise. She brushed past Stas Alley and stepped on Plo Koon's foot. On her way to the door, she couldn't stop to apologize. She heard Obi-Wan call after her, but she couldn't take the time to focus on what he was saying. The lights still weren't at full strength by the time she reached the door. Anakin didn't think about it until she stepped into the sun-drenched hallway. The lights weren't dim. Her vision was darkening. Get out. Go away. Find somewhere to hide and let this pass, she thought frantically. Her heart was pounding. Her ears were ringing. The world spun and her vision continued to darken. Anakin took a lurching step forward, her knees buckling. She tried another. She wasn't sure her leg moved that time. Anakin had the vague sensation of being on the floor, somebody calling her name, footsteps, and a hand on her shoulder. Her last thought was a soft, despairing, "Oh no," before she blacked out. Anakin came to slowly, disoriented, confused. Awareness returned in pieces. She felt like gravity was pressing down on her harder than usual. Her limbs weighed a ton. Her eyelids felt just as heavy and unwilling to open. It was impossible to move. Her headache returned, pounding dully behind her eyes. Her nausea was back, too, squirming uncomfortably through her empty stomach, but it stayed where it was. She felt a presence over her. It covered her like a warm blanket. "Just lie still," it whispered in the back of her mind. "You're safe." Where was she? What happened? Someone was touching her left arm, lifting it, prodding it, manipulating it with warm, gentle hands. She was aware of a cold sensation flowing from her hand and down her arm. She heard soft, intermittent clatters as whoever it was continued their ministrations. After a moment, something long and sharp was drawn out from the interior of her elbow. The hand pressed something to the spot for a moment before bending her arm. A woman's voice instructed softly, "Take these to the analytical droids. Have them run a full diagnostic." A younger voice affirmed the order. Anakin heard soft, rapid footfalls move away. She felt a small presence leave. Despite the heaviness in her body and the soothing presence, Anakin was beginning to feel a growing sense of dread. This was wrong. The soft presence, the gentle administrations, the poking and prodding. She wasn't supposed to be here, but where was here? Her brain struggled sluggishly to put the pieces together. The hands returned and rubbed something sticky around Anakin's left elbow. Anakin forced her eyes to open. They resisted. Then the hands moved and began pulling at her shirt. Anakin panicked. Her right hand flashed up, grabbing an intruding hand by the wrist. Her eyes shot open. She was instantly assaulted by bright white light. "Calm down, Skywalker. You're all right. You're in the infirmary." Anakin blinked slowly as her eyes adjusted to the light. She focused on the gentle face of Stas Sally. "What happened?" she asked, releasing the healer's hand. To her immense relief, Alice took a step back from the bedside. "You collapsed after the Outer Rim meeting. Do you remember?" It took a moment for the memory to come back to Anakin. "Yes, I remember." "Good. You're severely dehydrated and your blood sugar is incredibly low. When you stood up too quickly, your blood pressure tanked. I don't know where you were off to in such a hurry, but you barely made it out of the door." The healer frowned at Anakin. "Obi-Wan said you had been feeling ill for a while. If you were sick, you should have come to a healer." Anakin knew exactly why she didn't go to a healer, but she wasn't about to tell Allie that. She rubbed at her temples, settling for a half-truth. "I've had a migraine for the last few days. I thought it would go away on its own, but it hasn't. I was actually going to come for something later." Stas Ali nodded, accepting the story. "I put you on IV fluids. You'll be here for an hour or two, but if everything looks good, You should make a speedy recovery. Great. Anakin only just noticed the IV stuck in the back of her hand. Bright yellow fluid dripped rapidly from a bag hooked to a stand beside her. She recognized the mixture. Combat medics carried them. It was a high dose of vitamins and minerals meant to quickly get an exhausted clone back on his feet, or keep him alive until a medevac arrived. Anakin knew they were often called Aurelian bags, aptly named for the fruit's color and revitalizing nature. This was good. The IV fluids would be exactly what she needed to get back on her feet and out of the med bay. I'm going to continue my exam, Ali explained, moving to prod Anakin's stomach again. Why? There's nothing wrong with my stomach, Anakin insisted immediately. It's standard procedure, Skywalker. You know this. She moved to lift Anakin's shirt again. Besides, it looks like you're barely eaten or drink anything in days. Something might be wrong. It's just my migraine. Anakin pushed away the intruding hands before they could even tug at the hem. You know how it is when your head hurts and your whole body suffers? Ali stepped back with an exasperated huff, placing her hands on her hips. Honestly, Skywalker, you're worse than a youngling. If you just sat still, this would be over in a minute. Anakin still fell still, pretending to feel guilty. I'm sorry, it's just that my head still hurts a lot. I'm not thinking straight. Stas rolled her eyes. I'll get you something for your migraine. She stepped through the privacy screen. Anakin sensed her walk into the next room. She returned a minute later with 2 white pills and a cup of water. Here, these should kick in about 10 minutes. She handed Anakin the medicine and watched her toss it back. Anakin held the pills under her tongue. She would have loved to take something for her migraine, but at the moment she wasn't exactly sure what was safe to take. I'm going to go check on your blood work. Don't go anywhere. Ali pointed a stern finger at Anakin before walking away again. Anakin barely waited until Stas had cleared the room. She spat out the pills and threw them under her bed. Her heart pounded in her ears. Blood work was not good. Her mind flew into a panic. The analytical droids would know exactly what was wrong with her. It was only a matter of time before they finished their analysis and delivered their diagnosis. She had to get out of here before they told a healer. A plan was already forming in her mind. She'd take her fighter and fly far away, out to a neutral or Hutt-controlled planet, away from the war, away from the Jedi, away from anyone who knew her. Actually, it would be smarter to lose her fighter before she completely disappeared. She'd have to go to a transport hub where she could get passage to any one of thousands of systems. That would make it impossible to find her. She had to go now and leave everything behind. Obi-Wan would understand in time why she ran away. As for Padme, she'd contact him somehow and tell him what had happened. He would come and find her. She knew he would worry about her running away too, but he would also understand. Anakin pushed herself up on shaky arms and swung her legs over the edge of the bed. She grabbed her IV stand for support. Her body protested greatly to this upheaval, and her vision darkened. She braced herself, willing the dizzy spell to pass quickly, knowing she had precious few moments to make it to freedom. It didn't pass. With cold dread sinking into her stomach, Anakin knew she would only get a few steps in before she collapsed again. Cursing furiously, Anakin laid back down, trying to calm her heart and slow her breathing. If she couldn't run, then she had to find another way out, a way that wouldn't get her expelled from the Order. But what could she say? Stas Ali watched Skywalker quietly from the far end of the infirmary. She had a clear view of the bed through a gap in the screens. What she saw was deeply concerning. Skywalker was cagey with healers, always had been, probably always would be, but even she would let the healers do their work. When it came down to it, something was wrong today. She complained about her migraine, but spat out the offered medicine. She had just tried to get up, presumably to run, and she didn't want to be touched or examined. Ali sighed and turned away after it was clear her patient wasn't going anywhere. Knowing Skywalker, she had probably injured herself doing something stupid or illegal, most likely both, and was trying to hide it until it healed on its own. She expected the blood work would come back diagnosing an infection. Stas had no doubt she'd go and complete her examination and find an open wound, bandaged with field dressing, inflamed, and weeping pus. That would be something Skywalker would do, and it would explain her symptoms. The apprentice from earlier approached her quickly. He stopped and bowed sharply. "Excuse me, Master Ali. The droids are done with their analysis." Stas hid a small smile behind her hand. Master Chi did like her Padawans to follow protocol to the letter, and this boy certainly took his master seriously. He was still a young apprentice, at most 13 years old. She wondered if he would one day grow out of his rigidity. "Thank you, particularly for your assistance earlier. I will let your master know how well you did. You may return to your studies." The Padawan tried to hide his beaming smile by muttering another thanks and bowing deeply. Then he turned sharply on his heel and left. Stas smiled at his quickly retreating back before moving into the diagnostic suite. It was a mid-sized sterile laboratory, staffed entirely by droids. An expensive window allowed healers to observe if necessary, but the lab was sealed off. It lowered the risk of contamination if organics just stayed out. Samples were submitted through a sealed slot. Results were available for reading at several consoles. Stas walked over to one such console and keyed in her security code, followed by her vocal password. They were nothing if not secure with their medical files. Only authorized healers could access records. "Greetings, Master Ali. What can I help you with today?" the computer's cool female voice asked. "Most recent diagnostic blood work for Anakin Skywalker." The file flicked onto the screen in an instant. "Shall I summarize for you?" "Yes." Ali was already skimming through the file, looking for abnormalities. Patient showed negative for any infections, imbalance of electrolytes, and increased levels of creatinine suggest dehydration. Low counts of leptin and iron suggest malnutrition. High levels of human chronic gonadotropin present in blood. Diagnosis: pregnancy. Ali stopped her scrolling. She furrowed her brow at the screen. "Can you confirm that?" The computer brought up a chart of Anakin's blood work, laying out the various levels and markers it had measured. It even took the courtesy of highlighting the HCG levels. Levels exceed any previous results from patient, all being nominal. However, some diagnostic tests are still underway. A complete report will be completed in 43.8 hours. Stas honestly didn't know what to think. The diagnostic wasn't complete. There must be another explanation. Some human disease or unknown virus that would mimic the symptoms and cause the hormonal imbalance. Skywalker wouldn't have actually broken the code, would she? Export this report to a datapad, she ordered the computer. A minute passed while the computer worked. Allie stared at the chart. With a software, a slot opened on the console and a datapad poked out. Allie took the pad, checked that the lab report was on it, and logged out of the system. She stopped briefly to check and make sure Skywalker was still in medbay. She was still laying in bed, eyes shut, possibly sleeping. Did Anakin know what might be wrong with her? Allie glanced at the report. With levels this high, she had to have suspected something by now. That is, if that was really her problem. Who knew with the way Skywalker went rocketing around to every corner of the Outer Rim? There was no knowing what she may have come in contact with out there, at least not until the complete diagnostic was finished. Ali returned to her office and sat at her desk, poring over the report. She read through quickly, hoping something obvious would jump out at her. When nothing did, she stared at the beginning again, this time reading carefully, looking for any detail or explanation she had missed or the computer had missed. Perhaps a combination of symptoms or two conflicting blood results would prove that the initial diagnosis was wrong. After her fourth read-through, she finally gave up. She couldn't find or think of a single reason why Skywalker was anything but pregnant. She checked the time. Nearly an hour had passed. Anakin's IV would be empty soon. Allie would need to check if she needed a second bag. Given the shape she was in, probably Stas was convinced it was nothing short of a miracle that Anakin was on her feet this morning, however briefly. Her blood levels showed evidence long-term dehydration and malnutrition. Clearly, this migraine wasn't her first episode in recent weeks. She had seen harder Jedi go down easier, and none of them had ever been pregnant. Stas rubbed at her eyes and took a deep breath. Before she did anything, though, she was going to get a second opinion. Perhaps a more senior healer would know of something she didn't. She picked up the datapad and walked a few offices down, hoping the head healer was in. Her door was open, and she sat at her desk, reading something off her computer. Master Chi, can I get your opinion on something? The Twi'lek looked up at Stas. Of course, what's the problem? I have a patient presenting with symptoms of an impossible diagnosis. I was wondering if you knew of anything that could mimic the symptoms and blood results. Who's the patient? Anakin Skywalker. Volkara Chi almost resisted rolling her eyes. Her leku twitched in annoyance. I'll tell you what Skywalker suffers from. Youth, stupidity, and the delusion that she's invincible. I can't wait to see what she's done this time. She stated dryly, holding out her hand for the datapad. What do the droids think she has? She asked as she began skimming the file. They think she's pregnant. Volkara raised a curious eyebrow. That would be quite the impossible diagnosis, or in Skywalker's case, highly improbable. I wouldn't put anything past her. Stas waited quietly for Chi to read. After a few minutes, the healer set the datapad down. I was wondering if you knew of any diseases or hormonal disorders that might produce the symptoms without someone actually being pregnant. Master Chi shook her head. Nothing comes to mind. She stood up, picking up the datapad. But this may be a diagnosis of exclusion. Given her levels, no doubt there would be visual evidence by this stage. At the very least, an exam would give us the answer. Did you perform one? She would not allow me to. Of course not. Vocara rose to her feet with a sigh. Let's go then. Vocara led the way out of her office and into the ward. She marched directly to Skywalker's bed. Stas Ali was relieved to find the Jedi still laying there, eyes closed, breathing even. Stas thought she was asleep, but she opened her eyes and sat up as soon as the healer stepped through the curtain. My migraine is gone and I'm feeling better. Can I go? She asked, lifting her left hand and shaking the nearly empty IV. Not yet. She handed Ali the datapad and stepped forward. Something came up in your blood work. We need to do an exam. Would you mind lifting your shirt, please? Anakin looked away from the healers. Can we do this later? I'm tired. I just want to go back to my room and sleep for an hour or two. Now, Knight Skywalker. Master Chief's tone left no room for argument. Anakin clenched her jaw and slowly reached for the hem of her shirt. She rolled it up, revealing what Ali sincerely hoped would be a flat plane of her stomach. It wasn't. A small yet unmistakable bulge protruded from her lower abdomen. Anakin said nothing. That confirms it. It matches the blood test, Ali said, quietly looking between the chart and Anakin. The two healers shared a look. This could mean expulsion from the Order for Skywalker. Vocara moved forward to perform an examination. Skywalker pulled her shirt back down, holding it tightly. She glared at the head healer. I want to speak to Obi-Wan. That struck both the healers as suspicious, but she wasn't having it. You're getting an exam, Skywalker. Anakin scooted away from the approaching healer. You don't touch me until I speak to Obi-Wan. Otherwise, I'm walking out right now. Vocara stepped back, matching Anakin's glare. Fine, she snapped. Let Ali take the IV from your hand. You don't need it anymore. She turned and marched through the privacy screen, presumably to find someone to summon Master Kenobi. Stas stepped forward, holding her hand out for Anakin's, motioning to the empty IV bag. May I? Anakin reluctantly held out her hand. Stas gave her a visual exam while she removed the line. The Aurelian bag did its trick. She was looking better. Not good enough for any strenuous physical activities, but another hour or so resting and she might be released. It showed up in my blood work? She asked quietly after her hand was needle-free. She had picked up the datapad and was looking at the chart. Yes, Stas cleaned up the IV bag before pointing to a specific point on the chart. That hormone is specific to placental formation. Anakin nodded, but said nothing. Ali gave her a moment, waiting to see if she had anything else to say. She didn't. End of chapter.